Hi, everybody. Here we go for segment 2, our story and Lyme disease and everything connected to it. So where I left off last time was that we had gone to the rheumatologist, was told it definitely could not be Lyme disease for Logan. Found out that he had had a Western blot test, which I didn't know anything about. Started researching that. And I'll tell you what I found out. And we were referred to a pediatric cardiologist at Children's, and the rheumatologist wanted to run more tests on Logan. And then we were going to have a follow-up with his primary care, his pediatrician. And in the meantime, I got the appointment with the Lyme literate doctor in Hanover. So it was an hour and a half from us. And what I got for the information on the Western blot was, again, it's in what they call an indirect test. So it's looking for antibodies. And they're looking for very certain IgG or IgMs, how your body's reacting to things. And it looks like a graph, and there are certain bars. And according to the CDC, in order to have a positive Lyme diagnosis, you need to have 7 to 8 of those bars. So within certain variations. What I was reading from different Lyme patients and different Lyme literate doctors is that those criteria that were handed down in 1994, so it's been a while, right? Is that there's a number of reasons this test isn't that effective. And one of the reasons is that it's testing for antibodies, and not everybody is going to show that in the same way. And the other thing is that there are certain bands that what they were seeing, that person through other clinical tests had Lyme disease and responded to treatment and was getting much better, but they didn't have all the bands that the CDC required. So I got the copy back of Logan's, and there were a couple bands in particular that were indicative of Lyme, regardless of how many bands you had. So that was concerning, and I sent all that to the Lyme literate physician that was willing to see us. In the meantime, Logan was getting very depressed. To watch your kid change so quickly is really weird and hard. And it's hard to explain, but it's almost like nothing brought him joy because he was just constantly in pain. He was starting to hit his legs all the time, like he would hit them with his fists. And, one minute it would be the rib pain, and another minute it would be the jaw pain. I mean, it was just ongoing and really moody. I mean, I get it now that I've been through it. It's hard, and you feel really alone, especially even as a kid when you're going to these doctor's appointments and nobody seems to be able to give you an answer. And I think we're really conditioned and used to, which probably isn't right, that when something's going on, we go to the doctors, they give us medicine or tell us what's going on, and we're better. Well, when you're chronically ill and that's not happening, and they're saying right in front of you, we have no idea what's going on with you, it wears on you. It really does. So that was going on with him. And they were lining up a GI doctor as well, because although interestingly enough, they didn't really want to go there right away. They did an x-ray, they saw the constipation, and they didn't want to really do a whole lot about it other than, make sure he was getting applesauce and just random stuff. They didn't want to tackle it the way that I thought they might want to. He had some buildup in there, but they didn't think it was anything major. And what was interesting to me was that they kept thinking that none of these things were related to each other. And I would say things like, well, do we need to change his diet? Do we need to look at, no, there's no real reason to do that, which now in hindsight as a health coach, I'm like, should have been right up there. What are we doing? So the Western blot to me looked positive based on everything that I could see. It's just these outdated criteria that, I mean, didn't seem to make a lot of sense and wasn't adding up with what I was seeing with other people. So we went and met with the Lyme literate physician. He wanted to run another Western blot through another lab, and he wanted us to change Logan's diet and go to an anti-inflammatory diet, no sugar whatsoever. And Logan was a sugar fiend. This is back before I was a health coach. I had no idea about nutrition other than what I was taught as a personal trainer, and I can tell you we weren't taught a whole lot. So I thought I was doing well with the boys with food, and I was clearly not, but I didn't know that. So we had to make a lot of changes. Now the issue with this doctor was that some of what he was working on or talking about wasn't adding up with any of a lot of the research I was doing or other patients I was talking to. And he didn't tell me anything about co-infections. And later on, when I asked about it, he said, "No, if I'm treating this, I'm treating those at the same time, and that doesn't make sense." He wanted to see Logan every 30 days, check in with him, see him, physically see him, and if anything came up, I could call him. The great thing about this doctor was that he took insurance. That is the first and last time I ever had a Lyme literate physician take insurance. So I didn't know any different, but that was pretty cool. He was technically a pain doctor. So that's how that process started. And what he told us was, this is going to be a long haul, probably years. And Logan is going to feel worse before he feels better. And depending on how this Western blot comes back, I can tell you that through all the clinical stuff that I've gone through with Logan and everything you filled out, the chance of him having Lyme is very high. So, we should probably treat and see how he responds. So I was really nervous about that and said, okay, let me talk to my husband. And in the meantime, we were paralleling appointments. So we went to see the cardiologist because he was having pain, and they said, well, we need to check everything out. We did all these tests, took forever to get in, did all these tests, everything came back completely normal. And I had put on there that he was seeing this doctor for Lyme disease. And the cardiologist was a woman, came in to talk to me and said, I see everything in his file that he's a negative for Lyme. And I said, I know, but we're retesting him through another doctor, and we're just not sure. And she said, what I have to tell you is that there's not a whole lot I can say except keep going. Like, follow the path you're on, because something's up. Something's not right here. He is having severe chest wall pain, and that's something we see with Lyme disease. But I can only go by what we've got for tests here, for test results here. So that was a little eye-opening. And I asked for a copy of his records, and there was no listing of that comment. I found out later that's pretty normal. So they may tell you something to your face, but not write it in the file. I also had written in the file, crazy mother, with a pediatrician when I got those notes back. But in the meantime, we went to meet with the pediatrician again about the stomach aches. since the cardiologist and the rheumatologist had nothing to do with that. And I was trying to get a referral to a GI as we were dealing with working on, does he have Lyme disease, with the Lyme literate doctor. And they were hesitant to give it to me. And I started telling him, the pediatrician, how Logan was starting to get depressed. And he's really tanking here. And he said, I'll never forget this. He said, you know what? We might be onto something, because depression can cause these types of symptoms. They can cause pain. So maybe this is, maybe he needs to see a therapist. And I literally said, are you fucking kidding me? What? Poor Logan was right there. I'm sorry, Logan. I was like, are you fucking kidding me right now? Like, he's depressed because he's in pain. This started with this. What are you talking about? Like, what? And I fired him that day. I said, you know what? You're fired. We're out of here. I couldn't go back there. I did go back one more time, and I'll tell that story. But we got the results back on the Western blot that we had run again, which was exactly as the last Western blot. And according to this doctor, that's fine because it's positive. He had 4 bands that are indicative of Lyme, and he just wouldn't have those bands and wouldn't be having these symptoms. So we started treatment, antibiotics, and he was on 2 different antibiotics. And this doctor did not believe in any type of nutritional supplementation like probiotics or any of that, because I had started to research this stuff, and I'm like, I'm nervous about this. We're killing all his good bacteria. I'm fine with getting him treated, but what are we doing to support his body? And he said, we're not going to do anything to support his body because we want to know how badly he feels so that we know if it's working. We won't know how it's going unless he feels awful. I need to know if he herxes. And it went on like that for a year. Pulsing, different antibiotics, herxing, having awful times with that. And then, but he had many symptoms that improved. His muscle pain was less. His stomach aches were way less. So there was improvement, but there was new stuff that sucked. The worst part was there were lots of bad times, but probably the absolute worst that we've had to go through was he woke up. He was in the middle of treatment, so he had just, I think he was on like day 7 or something of a new antibiotic. And I had, at this point, learned about co-infections and kept like hammering home, like, are we dealing with co-infections? Do we know? Do we need to test? Da, da, da. So I was going back and forth with this doctor about that and nutritional stuff. So I was already starting to make changes, but every time we'd went, I'd go with this list of things I'd be asking questions about. And I just felt like we weren't getting very far. Logan woke up one morning, it was in the summer, and he woke up, so this is a year later, woke up and couldn't pee. I mean, just couldn't go. He needed to go, he couldn't go. And the more he tried, the more he got stressed out. He'd try sitting, he'd try standing, he couldn't go. And it'd been a long time, and he'd gone, all night. And I was like, uh-oh, like, we're in trouble here. I'm going to have to take him to the ER. And I did. And it was bad. They were not equipped to deal with a child. They put in an adult catheter, and they couldn't do it. They had to wait for the surgeon, the urologist, and he had gotten out of surgery, so he came in and he put it in. But they didn't even put in a child size at that point. They just used what they had. So they emptied his bladder, and this was, I mean, you got to know that it'd been a year, more than a year, of dealing with a really sick kid, up and down, including all these mood swings and crap and whatever. And I was just barely holding on. And they said, okay, so you can go home. He's got a catheter in. So you can go home and we'll set you up with an appointment at Children's at Chad. And I'm like, what? I'm not a nurse. What do you mean? I'm taking him home with a catheter in. Like, what? And they're like, yeah, we got to leave it in. I mean, you can't go. So that was really bad. Logan had that catheter in for 10 days. It was horrible. I mean, of all the things that we went through, that kid went through, that was the worst. And it was crazy because initially the ER wasn't crazy really in hindsight, but the ER and Children's didn't want to hear anything about the Lyme disease, that he was in Lyme disease treatment or any of that. It wasn't until we got to the actual urologist at Children's, a pediatric urologist. She was a woman, and she asked the nurse or whoever it was assisting her to leave the room. She wanted to talk to Brett and I alone, and said to us, I've read through the paperwork and I see that he's being treated in Hanover for Lyme disease. And I said, yes. And she said, good, because it's rare, but it can affect the bladder. You think of the bladder as a big muscly thing, and it can. We don't see it all that often as a symptom. She goes, but we do, and you need to keep going this route. In the meantime, Logan is, she thought that it was a combination of things, that it was the Lyme disease, that it was severe chronic constipation that nobody had truly addressed, and the probably a reaction to him being on these new medications and killing off the Lyme. None of that was in the file except for the constipation stuff when I got the copy of the file later. So they prepared us that maybe he would have to self-catheterize his rest of his life. And we were pretty freaked out. I mean, that's pretty awful. That's a pretty big deal. And they took the catheter out and he could go. The Lyme literate physician was pretty helpful and understanding during this time. He really wanted to make some adjustments to what meds he was on because he had herxed obviously so badly or whatever. And Logan started the process of retraining his bladder and having to go, so not only we had to go back and forth to Hanover for the Lyme disease treatment stuff, but then we ended up having to go to Children's in Peabody because that was the closest, and sometimes in Manchester, wherever she was available. And he had to do all this retraining of his bladder to make sure he was good to go and that this didn't happen again. And in the meantime, I had to learn everything known to man about poop, and which is why I write a blog about poop, because I had to chart that kid's poop for 4 years. I had to see it. I had to chart it. We had to really pay attention. And at the time, I didn't know anything about nutrition. You got to remember. So they put him on Miralax, which is not a good idea, by the way, in my opinion. I have clients do something completely different now, but I didn't know. I was like, we're never having a catheter again. So if that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do. Just having him do it. I mean, people poop their pants. He had to have a change of clothes at the school because at any moment he pooped his pants at a field trip one time. The poor kid. Nobody knew. I was there. We like a champ. We covered that up. But he couldn't go on play dates. He couldn't go. You know, we're talking second grade here. He couldn't do sleepovers because in the night, screaming in the middle of the night, and he's on 50,000 medications, and he missed a lot of school because he was so tired, and it was bad. But there was some progress, and I was learning a lot. And after we had been a year with this doctor, I had found another doctor. Funnily enough, it was our new primary care who was Lyme literate, and I had no idea that she just treated Lyme too, like as just a thing. I didn't know, and she knew we were seeing this other doctor, so she never really stepped in. But because his headaches were so persistent, and we were talking about this at one of his appointments and checking in, and this is after the whole catheter episode and everything, she had said to me, I really think we need to look at co-infections, or is he addressing co-infections or whatever? And I said no, and then we ended up switching to her completely, and she took over his care. And it was very slow going. We continued on the antibiotics, and then we were going to start the process of checking for co-infections, and it was the way that she did testing was really long and involved, and that whole process started. In the meantime, after the catheter incident, after I got back all this information about Lyme disease and the positive Western blot test. And then by this point, Logan had had a couple different CD57 tests and all kinds of IgG, IgM tests, like totally loads of other stuff. That poor kid had so much blood work. I went to the pediatrician's office and asked to speak to the doctor. And he came out into the waiting room. And I held it up and I said, you know, he has Lyme disease. So you told me he didn't, and you were wrong. And you better change what you're doing, because this is not okay. Not okay. And he got right in my face and said, you have no idea what you're talking about. And then left. So, funnily, I do know what I'm talking about. And that was we just got into this routine of charting poop and changing how Logan was eating, and he would have a day or two where he'd be doing okay, and then he would really need to rest. Like, he would be so fatigued. It was not normal for a little kid, and it was hard to watch. He also started getting a tick where he would do this, like hit his ear, and he had a couple other weird neurological tics, and we hid that pretty well from our family and everybody, because both Lyme literate physicians said they thought it would pass, and that it was part of die-off and all of that. I just wasn't sure, and I just couldn't handle it. So we really tried to hide it and not make a big deal out of it, and it did. It left. But it was probably almost a year that went on, and this was, so we're in maybe 3 years worth of treatment off and on. Didn't know about any co-infections yet. Hadn't tackled it yet. That'll be next. But a couple of tips, and then I'll end. Have every piece of paper from every doctor, every test, everything. Have a copy for yourself. If you yourself have Lyme disease and you've got brain fog, Logan's was awful. He had like no short-term memory. It was like bad. While you're in treatment, then have an advocate and have a friend, have somebody record when you're talking to the doctor so you can listen to it back. Do that for yourself. And if you're going in and you've got a kid, talk to an advocate before you go to the doctor so you can have the right questions. Because it's really, I feel like people get intimidated. They go to the doctors and they feel like the doctor's just going to tell them what they need to know. They don't. They can be a great doctor, but they're on a time frame. They feel a lot of times people are on a need-to-know basis. If they needed to know that, they would ask that. Be the annoying person. Don't worry about that. It's your body. It's your kid. You've got to. I mean, I welcome it. If someone writes "crazy lady" in the file, great, because I don't really give a crap at this point. I just need the answers. It's that simple. All right, well, that is it for today. And next segment will be on co-infections and how that all happened for us. And it was about this time where I realized I probably had Lyme disease. I'd go in, we'd be going over a symptom checklist, which you do every time you go in, and I'm like, oh my God. Sometimes I would forget and think, am I checking this off for myself or Logan? Ooh, this isn't good. And I will fill you in on that. Bye.